Sunny in Darwin. Now to Canberra, where David Speers and Jane Norman are standing by with coverage of the Economic Reform Roundtable.
Ros, thank you, and hello and welcome to the ABC special coverage of the final day of the government's Economic Reform Roundtable. I'm David Speers.
And I'm Jane Norman, joining you from Parliament House on Ngunnawal country.
Well, this morning's session on this final day has been focused on budget sustainability and tax reform, the one many of the attendees were waiting for, specifically some of those intergenerational inequalities in the tax system that do make it harder for young people to achieve a higher standard of living.
Here is how the day has unfolded so far.
Morning, everyone.
Budget repair and tax reform will be the key issues discussed on the last day of the Albanese government's Economic Reform Roundtable in Canberra.
Okay, everyone, we might make a start. Welcome to day 3. By my count, we're into the 20th hour. And this room is where great ideas come to compete for scarce government funding.
More than ever, we have to set tests for the Treasurer at this roundtable.
We need to do more work to make the budget more sustainable, and that's what we are asking you to grapple with today. 7 big intensifying pressures on our budget. There are 7 structural issues that we deal with. 5 of them are in the care economy.
Mark Butler announced a major change to the NDIS in an effort to rein in the costs of the scheme.
Children with mild developmental delay and autism will soon be able to receive support outside of the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
We have got the NDIS growth down substantially, but still growing very quickly.
And we know that the plan the government has is for the states to take that over. But that plan is falling apart.
Union Movement's going to be fighting for young people this afternoon. It's absolutely critically important that we address the biggest issue, which is intergenerational inequality. It's just not fair.
We think that the tax questions are central to some of the other fundamental issues of the first 2 days, productivity and resilience as well. We also recognise that tax reform isn't just about budget sustainability, that's part of it.
The spending just has to stop. We're not seeing anything come out of the productivity roundtable to demonstrate that.
So with that, I thank the media and ask them to excuse us.
Well, someone who has been a key player around that roundtable over the last 2.5 days, there's still a few hours to go, is the Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, who joins us. Thanks so much for joining us during the lunch break of the roundtable session. Katie Gallagher, tax is the big talking point for this afternoon. We do hear from a lot of the attendees that one of the things that needs to be fixed is this intergenerational inequality in the tax system. Do you at least agree with the principle that we have a problem in the system when it comes to intergenerational inequality?
Well, it's certainly something that's been raised through the week, not just I haven't sat in the first session on tax, but throughout the week across a range of areas. I think there is an acknowledgement and a responsibility on leaders to look at what's happening, not only right now, but to think about what the consequences of those decisions or those non-decisions are on the generations that come after us. I think that's been a real theme throughout the productivity roundtable.
So you agree with that theme, that growing consensus that there is a problem when it comes to intergenerational inequality?
Look, I think if across... I'm trying, because I know where people want to go.
I know.
The tax sessions are underway now, and I don't want to sort of interfere in that.
But you've heard these debates from all of them leading into this roundtable. People like Ken Henry, Allegra Spender, the ACTU, Aruna Safanapalli, who we're going to talk to shortly as well. They're all saying it. I'm just wondering if you agree.
Well, I think you can look at some, pretty clear data that shows that it is getting harder and for younger generations in tax, in other areas as well. And I think there is a responsibility on us to make sure that the systems we have, whether it be tax or the systems we provide, how we provide services, that we deal with those things, that we don't ignore them.
So what do you do then on tax? Because you're clearly not going to solve that in a few hours this afternoon, but is there a case for a tax review, a Treasury review, a white paper, something to follow this moment that's going to address this inequity?
Well, we've got obviously the tax policies we took to the last election. We will be implementing those. Again, difficult for me right in the thick of the discussions that are being had now to say what is going to be the outcome of the sessions that will follow this afternoon. The Treasurer will be standing up to talk through that, so I would prefer to wait for that, and I'm not trying to avoid your questions. This is going to be a lively discussion this afternoon. I think people, there's a lot of shared views in the room, and I think there's probably some points of difference as well, but we're having the roundtable so that we can have those discussions. Don't limit it by, saying one thing or another in the lead up to it, and try and get the best outcomes across the 3 days.
Yeah, the point I'm getting to is this isn't the end of the process today, right? Something has to flow from this.
Well, there will be outcomes from the roundtable, and I don't think anyone in the roundtable has pretended that some of the big challenges we've been talking about, whether it be AI, whether it be budget sustainability, whether it be productivity in general, has a magic switch. In fact, that's been a common theme as well. If there was, we would have switched it and flicked it, and I think in many ways people would have liked that if there was some solution like that. But it's longer, harder, thoughtful work, and so no doubt there will be things that come out of this that will take longer.
Minister, I want to ask you about the NDIS in a moment, but just before we get there, and I know that tax is being discussed, but are you seeing that there is a broad consensus and broad support now for an EV road user charge? We're expecting that to be one of the outcomes or a proposal that's gaining momentum at this summit.
Well, certainly it's been raised and talked about, and there seem to be, and again, not wanting to preempt some of the final outcome discussions, but there seem to be a lot of support and an acknowledgement that as our economy transitions to net zero, as people move from petrol to EV vehicles, that we need a way to ensure that we're funding the infrastructure we need, the road infrastructure we need around the country, and there did seem to be largely agreement on that. I'm not saying it's going to be non-controversial. There'll be discussions about, how you do it, when you do it. The states are actively involved, but people seem to think that is one of the, most obvious areas that we need to move.
Yeah, so that's coming for EV drivers, effectively.
Well, I think we've been clear. We were talking about it before the election. There's a piece of work underway already. Catherine King's talking to infrastructure ministers. What I'm relaying to you is views around the table, the round table, from those industry representatives, community representatives, union representatives. We're all in understanding what the issue is and why we are needing to talk about it and resolve it.
Yeah, to bring you back to the NDIS, the Minister, Mark Butler, made a big announcement yesterday, and one of the the big piece was the $2 billion Thriving Kids program to move children with mild and moderate developmental delays outside of the NDIS. That's a $2 billion Commonwealth commitment. Is it your expectation that the states collectively will match that funding?
Well, that is the expectation, so we've made provision for that. And this, I think when you look at how the NDIS has grown and developed, and we all accept that it's an essential piece of national infrastructure and it's done a lot of good for a lot of people, really changed lives, is that the system that used to exist outside the NDIS, the therapy centres, the early intervention centres, the areas you went when your child was maybe a bit delayed, needed a little bit of help, but otherwise got back on track, they don't exist anymore. And it's a problem. And Thriving Kids tries to find that, to reinsert that into our service system so it's not a one-way traffic into the NDIS.
And so the expectation is that the states do come on board. Who would be running the Thriving Kids program? Are you expecting that to be at a state level or a federal level? Like, who actually provides these services?
Well, I think it'll be a mix. I mean, this will be fleshed out. I mean, Mark's job yesterday, which he did really well, was to sort of say, look, this is the problem. This is what we'd like to do. We'd like to build a service system outside the NDIS. We'd like to move it along because there's been a lot of discussions around foundational supports, as it was talked about, but not a lot of action. So we're saying that we will be a part of that. We're not just outsourcing that to the states and saying you've got to deliver all of this. We're saying we want to be a player in that. And so I think it'll be a mix, and it will hopefully be building on existing services. So we're not recreating a new system, but you could perhaps use the MBS, or through Medicare you could provide some additional supports, whether it's be through the child and maternal health nurses that the states run. So I think the colouring in has to happen for sure, but I think Mark's point yesterday was we've got an opportunity now over the next 18 months or so to build and create this response for these kids that are getting sucked into the NDIS but otherwise don't need to be there.
The states are all, it seems, open to heading down this path, but they only found out about it yesterday, some when they saw Mark Butler stand up at the National Press Club. Why weren't they given a heads up?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've seen some of that commentary in the last 24 hours. Foundational supports has been on the agenda for a long time now.
This is a change, though, what he announced.
Well, it's been the change more is that the Commonwealth's prepared to be involved in that delivery of those supports, not that we are, you know, that they didn't know we needed to build this system. Everyone's known that for quite a while.
Just wondering if it is going to be collaborative, as you say, in running this whole thing, why not have a National Cabinet meeting where you all agree on this and then announce it?
Well, I think there was. I mean, there was. The National Cabinet. It agreed on trying to restrict growth in the NDIS to 8%. It agreed on a system of foundational supports. Yeah, and not a lot has happened.
But what I'm saying is when Mark Butler announces this new Thriving Kids approach and the timeframes around, you know, July next year, having it ready and then fully fledged by July 2027, why not have that agreed to in a meeting?
Well, I think there has been a lot of discussions around foundational supports and around timetables and around the types of services that we would want. I think what we're saying is we need to get cracking on it.
And you're saying to the states they need to start stepping up here. Is there a bit of a push publicly?
We have a sense of urgency around this, you know, and the states are sort of saying we don't want to be hung out on a limb, we don't want to be left responsible for all of this. Fair enough. Part of Mark's message yesterday was we are joining you at the table and we think there's real merit about designing a system. But we also need to, you know, acknowledge we have a role in that. We're a big provider of services, particularly for young families, and there must be opportunities for us to better tailor care for those kids.
Just coming back to the roundtable, before we let you go, what happened between Jim Chalmers and Ted O'Brien this morning?
Were you in the room?
Closed doors? Were you there?
I was in the room. Look, I think it was, you know, for us, we're pretty used to the hustle and bustle and to and fro of politics. You know, it was just an interaction like that. Someone who put their political view and Jim who had to kind of say, look, this probably isn't the right place for this, but everything you just said was not correct.
Ted O'Brien's point was around spending, having some rules in the budget around tax and spending, which...
Well, it was a number of points that he made.
But on that point, is there a fair point that there should be some clearer rules around tax to GDP ratio and not spending any more than the economy is growing?
Well, I think the point the Treasurer made, and we have our fiscal strategy, it's published in the budget, we have our budget process rules, they're very clear, they're available online, so I don't accept the point that Ted was making was that we don't have any. I just don't accept that at all. And as Jim outlined to the room, on any of the rules that people were talking about, we have exceeded them. And so we were talking about budget sustainability overall, and also explaining to the room about, you know, some of the trade-offs, some of the pressures that government is under. So when you have a contribution like spending is out of control, have a look at the top 20 programs that are growing and a big pressure on the budget. All of those are around health, education, aged care, disability, defence. I mean, you know, it's a bit simplistic to run a line that, you know, just cut spending and all our problems will be solved.
And difficult kind of areas to start reining in. But just as before we let you go, as this three-day summit nears its end, has it been a worthwhile exercise in your view?
Absolutely. I think the goodwill and the collaboration that's been shown, the time that people have given up. I mean, these are senior leaders in their own field that have been prepared to come here and sit for 3 days and talk about and consider issues that are not necessarily in their lane. That's been the real benefit of bringing that kind of, preparedness to come and think about things from other people's perspectives and genuinely use your own skills and talents about making a contribution on that. I think it's been incredibly important.
So what does it achieve then? What will happen?
Well, Jim will, I think at the end of the roundtable this afternoon, he will kind of pull it all together. So you'll have to wait for that. I'm not going to move out of my lane, but there'll be ongoing work. But I think the relationships and the preparedness to come and talk and listen to each other's perspectives has been incredibly useful for everyone, not just government.
Katie Gallagher, Finance Minister, we'll let you get back into it. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, coming up as flagged, Jane, we're going to talk to Aruna Sathnapalli, head of the Grattan Institute. She's been giving one of the keynote speeches there at the roundtable today, all about this tax issue, and she's laid out some really interesting points about what's kind of wrong in our tax system that we'll go through with Aruna Sathnapalli in a moment. But just on what we heard there from the Finance Minister, who's clearly not going to give away what is to come this afternoon from Jim Chalmers, but we will be looking to see what further steps go from here on the red tape stuff, the tax as well.
I think so. If you talk to some of the people in the room, they believe that there is a lot of momentum on things like housing and tax. And so it's very easy, obviously, to name those, but then it gets down into the finer detail. So, of course, you can't come out of this summit and say we're going to rejig the income tax system to make it fairer for younger people. We're going to suddenly crack down on, tax breaks and tax incentives, which is what a lot of groups want. So it looks like we are moving towards perhaps, a plan for a plan. Is there going to be some sort of white paper or just some sort of Treasury review, which the government can use?
For two reasons that would make some sense, because one, you've got to actually get the detailed work right, and the experts at Treasury are best placed to do that. But secondly, it goes to what the Prime Minister said on day one of this summit and what we know about his rather cautious approach to reform, and that is you've got to go on a journey that brings the people with you. You don't want to lose faith, you want buy-in, you want the Australian people to all understand here's the problem and here's our proposed solution.
It's about building trust, right?
And it might need going to the next election with any significant change.
And that is basically what the government has been saying without saying it, that there will be some short-term gains, but that there will be likely a bigger, bolder reform agenda at the next election. And given the numbers, you can expect that Labor probably is on track for a third term at this stage. But let's go to political reporter Liv Casely, who joins us now. And Liv has been speaking to lots of the attendees of this roundtable as they've broken for morning tea and lunch breaks. And Liv, thanks for joining us. We wanted to just ask you if you can give a little bit more insight into what people are telling you about these, was it biffo, was it a bit of theatrics between Ted O'Brien and Jim Chalmers in the room this morning?
Well, it certainly sounds like that. As viewers would know, business leaders, union chiefs and bureaucrats have been locked in the cabinet room in this direction at Parliament House over the past couple of days. So they haven't had their mobile phones. Media certainly haven't been allowed in. So what we've been getting information-wise has been dribbling out in dribs and drabs. Ultimately, though, while there's been a lot of goodwill in the room over the course of this week, as all these people put their heads together and try and put forward suggestions to solve Australia's productivity problem, it would appear that changed this morning when there was a war of words, if you like, between the Treasurer Jim Chalmers and the Shadow Treasurer Ted O'Brien. So I did manage to catch Mr O'Brien when he was out at the morning tea break after being tipped off to this little frisson, if you like, this morning. And apparently he told the room the test for the Treasurer today is to stop the spending spree, which starts with the introduction of quantifiable fiscal rules. So essentially taking a dig really at Labor's economic management. I'm told the Treasurer Jim Chalmers understandably took issue with that and accused Mr O'Brien of essentially playing politics and misleading the room, and essentially accusing him of, undertaking or carrying out behaviour that we'd usually see on the floor of the House in question time. The broader flavour, though, of this morning has been about the care economy and budget repair. How does the government provide a higher quality of service for government services, whether that be hospitals, aged care, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, but in a way that is financially sustainable? Of course, Labor has delivered back-to-back budget surpluses, but those fiscal pressures are undoubtedly there. And from what I heard, attendees were pretty pleased with the direction of travel, if you like, when it comes to the NDIS announcement we heard yesterday. The government saying that they do want to limit further the target for NDIS growth in the years ahead.
And Liv, that's on the spending side. On the tax side, which they're about to get into, what's the general sense you're picking up from those sitting around the round table about what they would like to see follow today? Is it some sort of further review on tax reform? What do they want?
Well, I think from those I've spoken to, tax reform is clearly something that they think needs to happen. In the lead up to the summit, we heard various suggestions from the unions and social services groups essentially calling for pretty major renovations of negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions. There's also a broad belief in inequality in the tax system, and young people especially essentially carrying the lion's share of the tax burden, and the impact that's going going to continue to have in the years ahead. So there's certainly an acknowledgement of that problem and a desire really to change this. What will happen from here? We're not likely to see any major tax announcements this afternoon when the Treasurer Jim Chalmers gets to his feet. He's indicated previously at his National Press Club address that he does see tax reform as a lever that the government can pull in order to increase productivity. But as we know, the Prime Minister later hosed down sort of any major announcements related to this. But I am told sort of generally we are likely to see Treasury, the Productivity Commission at least being tasked with further work to kind of model some of the ideas being put forward. And ultimately, I think we'll see a little bit more from the Treasurer when he gets to his feet later.
And we look forward to hearing that wrap up by the Treasurer. Olivia Casely, thank you for your information and analysis. Well, each day of the roundtable, the Treasurer has invited experts to give a presentation to really set the scene and set the stage for the discussion to come. And this morning it was all about tax, as we've heard, or this afternoon rather, and it was the Grattan Institute's Aruna Sathanapalli who was the keynote speaker. She joins us now. Aruna, welcome.
Thank you.
You've outlined priorities in terms of the tax system. We know that the biggest tax takes come from personal tax, company tax, the GST, payroll. I mean, it's such a huge area, but if you were to kind of drill down, what are the priorities that you see in terms of tax reform?
Yeah, so I'd say that personal income tax is probably the top of my list. It's obviously our biggest tax. It's important to get it right. But it's also an area where I think there's a pretty high degree of consensus around the problems that we've got in the system, that we lean too heavily on taxes on people's work and employment and too lightly on income that you can make pretty much any other way. Now, there's reasons for that. There's reasons why you would tax income from savings differently, but the extent to which we've given that preferential treatment and the differential treatment of different types of income makes the system more complicated than it needs to be and deeply unfair. And so there's a strong consensus around that. And unlike some of the other taxes that, you know, we're talking about, this is something that sits wholly with the federal government. And so it's something where we can see a pathway. It's not easy, but it doesn't have the same state-federal issues that some of the other taxes do.
Your presentation at the roundtable included a whole bunch of really interesting slides that you've helpfully shared with us. I want to bring up just a couple of them. This first one goes to this issue of intergenerational inequity. And you can see it there. Hopefully it's not too confusing, but Aruna, just explain to us what this chart tells us about those who are over the age of 65 in the yellow line and those under the age of 65 in the red line.
Other way around.
Oh, sorry.
So the yellow line, the yellow line is households under the age of 65, and there what you're seeing is, pretty unremarkable. The more income you make, you pay a bit more tax. That's just our progressive tax system. That's the fair go. The red line, though, tells you that households that are making the same amount of money, the exact same income, are paying substantially less tax.
And you had a figure in your presentation around a household on 100 grand.
That's right. So a household on 100 grand, you could be next door to each other, and a working household, say you've got two incomes, making 100 grand, will pay twice the tax of a household that's over 65 that has the same amount of income. Now, this is the point where it's very hard in principle to justify that outcome. That is something that is the consequence of decisions made in the past, but we've now gotten to a point where, and this is good news, more and more older Australians are retiring with healthy wealth and assets in their housing and in their super, but we've got a system that treats their income as just basically they can opt out of the tax system. Meanwhile, working Australians bear a lot more expenses early in life, but the tax system treats them like they're much more worth it.
And before we talk about what needs to change, there's one other chart that you had that I want to show here. Yeah. This is the scale of taxes and how efficient they are. Now explain this to them. At the top of the list there, the most inefficient taxes, and at the bottom, the most efficient taxes.
Yeah, and look, I'll say these estimates can vary. This is a commonly used set of numbers, so there's specific lines we can talk about in more detail. But the important thing to note is that if you tax something that cannot move, you don't tend to change behaviour, right? Like if you tax stuff we're digging out of the ground, it's only here. It isn't in other countries, it's less distorting. If you tax something that you want more of and that people have choices around, what you'll find is people tend to change their behaviour depending on your tax settings. So taxes that sort of, if you're taxing the normal profits that a business might make if they kind of, do well, you're creating a disincentive for people to set up a business and make that money. Mm-hmm. If you're taxing excess profits that are well beyond what you need to make an investment, then you can go for leather because you're not really going to change the equation. But similarly, our taxes around people's wages, particularly for working households, particularly for people with young children, you can see it play out in terms of the hours people work and the days people work. If you might love your job very much, but do you love enough to, give up 60 cents in every dollar that you're making? Probably not, but that's not setting up the right incentives when our population is ageing and we need people who are skilled to stay doing the jobs that they care about.
So what is the change then? So what are the income tax is the biggest issue here in the intergenerational inequality, as we keep hearing. So it's clear that after superannuation, rental deductions, capital gains tax are the biggest kind of tax breaks that offset, obviously, that allow people to keep more of what they're earning. What actually needs to change here in terms of the kind of tax mix switch?
Yeah, so there's kind of, broadly what we need to do is lift how much we tax income that is not from work and employment. I know that might be hard for some people to hear, but when you see the stats, like even very wealthy Australians are increasingly accepting that this isn't right.
So investment in tax breaks like negative gearing, capital.
So basically superannuation and the treatment of housing are the two big ones. That if those are those are the two bodies of biggest sources of wealth.
Tax them more.
Tax them or tax the income from them more. Yes. But the flip side is that, we need to look at how we're taxing wages. Now, I will say that it's not the case that kind of on average Australia's income tax is, particularly high compared to other countries. And in total, it's not that we collect more than countries we'd compare ourselves with. We're actually not, we're kind of low taxing. The issue is that our top marginal rate kicks in pretty early. And bracket creep over time, over the past couple of decades, means that it's just more onerous than it used to be, at the same time as housing costs have gone up. And at that stage of life where, you might be actually a pretty well-paid professional but still be doing it quite tough.
So the detail of how you do this tax mix switch to achieve these sorts of goals and have a far more efficient, productive tax system, they all would need to be thrashed out. Did you get the sense at this round table, and I know the conversation's continuing this afternoon specifically on this, that there is an appetite to do it, and what needs to now happen from the government from here? Yeah,
look, I think that there's pretty broad acknowledgement in the room that it is really hard to have a conversation about tax, and a recognition that, it's terrific that we've actually got it on the agenda at all. It's been a really hard thing to get on the agenda for a long time, for good reason, because it's really hard for politicians to make changes to tax without getting really beaten up, even if all the economists and all the experts are saying it's the best thing for the public interest. So first off, the acknowledgement that this is great that it's now on the agenda. We're not going to sort out the details in the room. There's a good degree of consensus on the points in which our tax system is imbalanced. It will take a process after this to work out what the steps look like. It could be incremental, right? You could fix it in pieces, or it could be something more systematic, and that will take time to work through, but we could potentially simplify the system a great deal.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the Treasurer says this afternoon and what the Cabinet will decide in the coming days and weeks on this. Aruna Sathanapalli, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Good luck with that final session on tax. So, Jane, we are drawing to an end. So I guess just to sum up what we've heard there, and I thought that was a really interesting conversation actually with Aruna around where the problems are with the tax system and broadly what needs to change in terms of the balance or imbalance that we have. But it is that detailed work that will matter. And it is the politics that will matter here as well. What's your sense about the politics, the political difficulty that the government would face in attempting any of this?
Well, I think before the election, Anthony Albanese himself acknowledged that reform is really hard in Australia and it's getting harder. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be attempted because the issues facing us are so great. So it doesn't mean the issues that we're facing aren't sort of great, but I think what Labor has now is a supermajority. They've got likely sort of a third term in Parliament. So I think that if you're sort of looking at what the government's saying, they're going to take a very cautious and slow approach to reforming some of these big issues in the economy, whether that is on income tax, whether it is, housing tax breaks. It's not super clear at this stage, but I think there's certainly an appetite for, various stages of what comes out of this summit in terms of how to implement it. And some of it will be this side of the election, some will be on the other side of the election.
Yeah, and we'll always be fascinated by the tension or difference in ambition between the Prime Minister, perhaps being a bit more cautious, and the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, who'll want to put the foot down a little more on more sweeping or ambitious reform. It's going to be fascinating. We're expecting to hear Jim Chalmers speak at the end of today, round about 5 o'clock. We'll bring that to you, and we'll have more from Jane in the news this evening. But Jane, thank you for the last few days of keeping our finger on the pulse of this roundtable. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for your company as well. We'll have more coverage throughout the afternoon on ABC News. Thanks for joining us.